He always knew the sound of a suitcase zipper closing. It was a sound that marked the beginning of a new chapter, but also the end of whatever comfort he had just started to find. For a long time, home was not a place on a map. Home was a feeling he was chasing, a place where he could stop running. In his early years, he moved from city to city, living in different apartments with his mother and sisters. He was a new kid so often that he learned how to fit in quickly, how to smile, and how to be quiet. He learned that if you kept your head down and were kind, people would let you stay. He was not the typical successful student. The letters on the page often dance around, making reading a struggle. School felt like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve, but he had a fire inside him. He found his release in sports, specifically ice hockey. The cold air, the sharp sound of skates cutting through the ice, and the speed of the game made him feel free. On the ice, he didn't have to worry about reading or math. He just had to move. He was a good goalie, known for being calm under pressure. Even then, people noticed he had a quiet strength about him, a way of blocking out the noise of the world to focus on the moment. But the ice rinks of Canada were not enough to hold his dreams. He felt a pull towards something else, something artistic. He decided to leave the familiarity of hockey and the cold winters behind. With a beat-up car and a few dollars in his pocket, he drove toward Los Angeles. The city of angels was bright, loud, and overwhelming. The sun seemed to shine harder there, baking the pavement and glinting off the glass windows of the tall buildings. It was a place where everyone wanted to be a star, where the air was thick with ambition and desperation. He didn't have a plan, really. He just had an old Volvo and a hope that he could act. He wasn't looking for fame. He was looking for a way to understand people, to understand life, and maybe to understand himself. He took small roles, appearing in commercials and low-budget movies. He didn't care about the money or the size of the part. He just wanted to be on set, to learn the craft of becoming someone else. He lived in cheap rented rooms and sometimes slept on friends' couches. He ate a lot of cheap food and kept his belongings few, ready to move at a moment's notice, just like he had done as a child. During this time, he met someone who would change his life forever. It wasn't a romantic connection, but a brotherly one. He met a young actor who had a wild, untamed spirit and eyes that seemed to see everything. This other actor was also new to the crazy world of Hollywood, but he burned with a different kind of intensity. When they met, it was like two pieces of a puzzle clicking together. They spent hours talking, not about movies or money, but about life, about the universe, and about how to be a good person in a world that often felt fake. They became inseparable. They were two young men trying to navigate a strange, plastic world without losing their souls. They would ride motorcycles together, feeling the wind rush past them, creating a bubble of freedom away from the cameras. They talked about music and books and the pain of growing up. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a drifter. He felt anchored. He had a friend who understood him without needing long explanations. They shared a dream of making art that meant something, of leaving a mark that was real and honest. As the years went by, the work started to come. He got parts in teen comedies and action movies. People liked him on screen. He had a goofy charm and sincerity that came through the camera lens. He wasn't a typical tough guy. He was vulnerable and open. Audiences could see that he was trying, that he cared. He was becoming famous, but he did let it change how he treated people. He still opened doors for others, still said please and thank you, and still looked people in the eye when they spoke to him. But even as his career was taking off, he remained a private person. He didn't go to the flashy parties or seek the spotlight when the cameras stopped rolling. He preferred quiet evenings, playing music, or just hanging out with his close circle of friends. He valued loyalty above everything else. The bond he had with his newfound brother grew stronger. They promised each other they would stay true to who they were, no matter how big their movies got. They wanted to be legends, but not for money or the fame. They wanted to be legends for the way they lived and the art they created. It was a time of bright sunshine and endless possibility. The future looked like an open road. He had found a place in the world of acting. He had a brother by his side, and he had the respect of his peers. He had worked hard to overcome his early struggles, moving from a kid who couldn't sit still in class to a leading man in Hollywood. It seemed like he had finally outrun the loneliness that had followed him since childhood. He stood on the edge of greatness, looking out at a vast horizon, believing that the best days were still ahead. He didn't know then that life is not a straight line, and that the hardest lessons were still waiting for him just around the corner. For now, though, he was just a young man with a dream, living life with an open heart and a hopeful smile. Happiness is a fragile thing. It can feel like a warm light that you hold in your hands, protecting it from the wind. But sometimes the wind is just too strong. For a while, it seemed like he had found a way to keep the light burning. He was becoming a name that everyone knew. He was starring in big action movies and traveling the world. But just as he was reaching the peak of his career, the ground beneath him began to crack. The happiness he had fought so hard to find was about to be tested in ways that most people could never imagine. It started with a phone call that no one ever wants to get. It was news about his best friend, the brother he had chosen, the one who understood his soul. They had grown up together in the spotlight, navigating the strange and often confusing world of fame. They had promised to look out for each other. But on a bright, starlit night in Los Angeles, that promise was broken. His friend was gone, taken suddenly and tragically. The world felt colder instantly. He didn't just lose a friend. He lost a part of his own history. He walked through the days that followed like a ghost. The city kept moving. Cars kept driving and people kept laughing, but for him, the volume of the world had been turned down. He attended a funeral, standing under the bright sun, feeling an emptiness so deep it felt physical. It was his first real encounter with the kind of grief that doesn't go away. It just learns to sit quietly beside you. He tried to keep working. He threw himself into his roles, using the movie sets as a place to hide. He was filming a movie about a futuristic world, a world of illusion and control. Ironically, while he was playing a character who was waking up to a new reality, his own reality was crumbling. He didn't talk about his pain. He didn't give interviews about his heartbreak. He just showed up, did his job, and went home to the silence. But life, with all its strange timing, decided to give him a ray of hope in the middle of the darkness. He met a woman named Jennifer. She was beautiful and artistic, with a gentle spirit that seemed to soothe the rough edges of his life. They connected instantly. She wasn't interested in his fame. She was interested in him. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he could breathe again. They fell in love, and it was a soft, quiet kind of love. It wasn't about flashy events or red carpets. It was about staying in, cooking dinner, and talking about their dreams. Not long after, they received the news that they were going to have a baby. It felt like a miracle. After all the loss he had been through, this was a sign that life could also bring beauty. He was overjoyed. He started to prepare for his daughter's arrival. He bought a crib and tiny clothes. He would talk to Jennifer's belly, imagining the life they would build together. He thought he had finally outrun the shadows. But the shadows were not done with him yet. The due date came and went, and then came the terrifying news. There were complications. He rushed to the hospital, his heart pounding in his chest. The hallway was white and sterile, smelling of antiseptic and silence. He waited, praying to a God he wasn't sure was listening. When the doctor came out, the look on the doctor's face said everything before a single word was spoken. His daughter had been born still. She was gone before she even took a breath. The grief hit him like a physical blow. It wasn't just sad. It was a shattering of everything he had hoped for. He held his daughter, so small and perfect, but so still, and felt a pain that no movie role could ever mimic. It was a heavy, suffocating darkness. He and Jennifer were devastated. They held on to each other, trying to keep from floating away into the void. The nursery they had built sat empty, a silent room filled with unfulfilled promises. It is hard to describe how it feels to lose a child. It is a wound that doesn't heal. It just becomes a part of who you are. The tragedy put a strain on everything, even on love. Grief is a lonely road, even when you are walking it with someone else. He and Jennifer tried to support each other, but the pain was too big. They drifted apart, separated by the very thing that should have brought them closer. They eventually broke up, but they remained friends, bonded forever by the loss of their baby. He was alone again, but this time, the loneliness was heavier because he knew what he had lost. He thought that he had endured all the pain a person could handle. He thought the universe had taken enough. But life is not fair, and it does not keep a scorecard of how much one heart can break. A few years later, while he was trying to find his footing again, tragedy struck for the third time. Jennifer was driving in the early morning hours. It was a clear day. The sun was just coming up, but something went wrong. There was an accident. She was gone, just like that. The mother of his child, the woman who had brought light back into his world when he was drowning, was taken from him. He stood in the aftermath of it all, looking at the pieces of his life scattered on the floor. He had lost his brother. He had lost his daughter. He had lost the love of his life. Most people would have broken. Most people would turn to anger or addiction to escape the sheer weight of that sorrow. But he didn't. He stood tall, even though his knees were weak. He felt the pain, every bit of it, but he refused to let it turn him into someone mean or bitter. He buried them quietly, without the press, without the fanfare. He wanted to keep their memories sacred, protected from the flashing cameras of the world that had made him famous. He became a man who carried a heavy backpack of stones everywhere he went. If you looked closely at his eyes in interviews from that time, you could see the sadness. It was a deep, ancient sadness, but there was also a kindness there. He knew what it felt like to have the world fall apart, so he treated everyone with a gentleness that was rare. He held doors open for strangers. He gave up a seat on the subway. He spoke softly and listened intently. He had seen the dark side of life, and he decided that he was going to be a source of light, no matter how dim it flickered. He was no longer just a happy-go-lucky actor from the hockey rinks of Canada. He was a man who had walked through the valley of the shadow of death and came out the other side, scarred but still standing. When the heart breaks, the body often finds a way to keep going. It is a survival mechanism, a way to keep breathing even when the air feels too heavy to inhale. For him, the way to survive was to disappear into someone else. He needed to leave his own life behind and step into a skin that was tougher, stronger, and capable of feeling pain. This was the perfect time for a new chapter in his career, a role that would demand everything he had. He signed on to play a character who discovers that his entire reality is a computer simulation. It was a science fiction action movie called The Matrix, and it became the shield he used to protect himself from the world. He threw himself into the training with a terrifying intensity. For months, he learned kung fu. He learned how to handle weapons and how to move with the precision of a machine. Every day, he was up before the sun, stretching his muscles and pushing his body to the limit. The physical pain was a welcome distraction. If his muscles were aching, if he was exhausted from running and jumping, then he didn't have the energy to think about the empty nursery or the face of a friend he had lost. The bruises on his shins were real, and they were easier to handle than the invisible bruises on his soul. On the set, he was the ultimate professional. When the director called action, he wasn't a grieving man anymore. He was Neo, the chosen one, the hero who could fly and stop bullets. He wore a long black coat and small, round sunglasses that hid his eyes. Those glasses were important. They were a mask. They allowed him to look out at the world, without the world seeing the sadness in his gaze. He performed his own stunts, dangling from wires high above the ground, throwing punches that connected with nothing but air. The crew watched in awe as he launched himself off walls and twisted through the air. They saw an action star in his prime. They didn't see a man who was running for his life. The movie was a massive success. It exploded onto screens around the world. Suddenly, he was bigger than ever. His face was on every billboard. His image was on every magazine cover. He was a global icon. But the louder the world cheered, the quieter he became inside. The fame felt like a separate thing, something that was happening to a character, not to him. He would walk through crowded streets, and people would shout his name, but it felt like they were shouting at a ghost. He was there, but he wasn't really there. He smiled for the cameras, signed the autographs, and shook the hands, but there was a glass wall between him and everyone else. He agreed to make 2 more movies back-to-back. It meant years of his life dedicated to this one character, and he was grateful for it. It meant he didn't have to stop. He didn't have to go home and sit in a quiet room. He could stay on the set, surrounded by lights and cables and people rushing around. He could focus on hitting his marks and saying his lines. The dialogue in the movie was often about reality and control, which felt deeply ironic. He was playing a man who was waking up to the truth, while in his own life, he was trying to keep the truth asleep. During the long months of filming in Australia, he kept to himself. He didn't go to the cast parties or spend his evenings in expensive clubs. He would ride his motorcycle through the empty streets at night, feeling the cold wind on his face. It was the only time he felt like himself. Just a man on a machine, moving through the dark. He ate his meals in his trailer, or sitting on a crate in the corner of the soundstage. He was polite to everyone, from the director to the person who swept the floor, but he kept a distance. He couldn't afford to get too close. Getting close meant risking loss, and he didn't think he could survive any more loss. There were moments when the mask slipped, just a little, sometimes between takes. When the camera stopped rolling and the crew bustled around to reset the lights, he would stand still and a look of profound loneliness would wash over him. It would last just a second before he caught himself and pulled the mask back on. But if you were watching closely, you could see it. You could see that this man, who was saving the world in the movie, was helpless to save himself in reality. He was carrying a heavy load, and the only way to carry it was to keep moving. He started to take other roles, too. Darker roles. Roles that dealt with loss and redemption. He played a serial killer in a movie called The Watcher. He played a man accused of a crime he didn't commit. He was attracted to characters who were suffering, who were on the outside looking in. It was safer to feel pain when it was scripted, when he knew exactly when it would start and exactly when it would end. Real pain was unpredictable. Real pain came in the middle of the night, or when he saw a child that looked like the daughter he never got to watch grow up. Despite the isolation, he never became bitter. He didn't treat people badly because he was hurting. In fact, he became gentler. He knew that life was short and fragile, so he tried not to add to anyone else's burden. When a stuntman got hurt, he was the first one to visit him in the hospital. When a crew member was having a bad day, he would make a joke to try to make them smile. He gave away gifts and money quietly, without asking for credit. It was as if he was trying to balance the scales, try and put some good into a world that had shown him so much bad. The years passed, and the Matrix trilogy was finished. The green code faded, the long black coat was hung up, and the sunglasses came off. But the man who emerged from the set was not the same one who had entered. He had become harder, like diamond. The pressure had compressed him into something unbreakable. He had proven to himself that he could endure. He could stand in the center of a hurricane and not be blown away. But he also learned that being strong doesn't mean you don't feel. It just means you keep walking even when your heart is dragging behind you. He was a legend on the screen, a hero to millions, but he was still just a man walking through his days, waiting for the pain to soften, waiting for the sun to feel warm again. He had survived the action, but the real battle was the one going on inside his own mind. Time has a way of changing people, but for him, the change was not about becoming harder. It was about becoming softer. After the years of high-speed chases and fighting in fictional worlds, he stepped back into the real world a different man. The intense acting gigs had helped him survive the worst of his grief, but they couldn't heal him completely. Healing was something he had to do on his own, in the quiet moments between the noise. He didn't know how to fix his own heart, but he figured out that he could help ease the burden for others. If he couldn't have the happy ending he dreamed of, he would help someone else find theirs. This was a time when he stopped thinking about himself and started thinking about everyone else. The massive success of the science fiction movies had made him incredibly wealthy. He had more money than he could ever spend in 10 lifetimes. Most people in his position buy huge mansions, fast cars, and throw parties on yachts. They build walls around themselves to keep regular people out. He did the opposite. He stayed in a modest home. He lived a life that was surprisingly normal. He didn't wear flashy watches or designer clothes just to show off. He wore boots that looked like they had walked 1,000 miles and jackets that had seen better days. To look at him on the street, you wouldn't know he was one of the most famous actors on the planet. You would just think he was a regular guy, perhaps a bit tired, but polite. But the biggest change wasn't in his clothes. It was in his wallet. When the time came to negotiate his salary for the sequels to his big hit, he did something that shocked the people in the suits. He realized that the special effects team, the people who worked behind the computers to make the movie look magical, were not getting a fair share of profits. Without them, the movie wouldn't be the hit that it was. So, he took millions of dollars out of his own pay and gave it to them. He didn't do it for the publicity. In fact, he tried to keep it secret. He just wanted to make things right. He understood that the guys working computers and setting up the lights had families and dreams just like he did. They deserved to be rewarded for their hard work. This kind of generosity became his signature. Later on, when he was making a movie called The Devil's Advocate, he wanted to work with a legendary actor, an older man he admired deeply. The studio, however, said they couldn't afford to hire such a big star. They had a budget. Without hesitating, he took a pay cut. He lowered his own salary by millions of dollars just so the studio could pay the other actor what he was worth. He didn't care about being the highest paid person on the set. He cared about making the best movie with the best people. To him, money was just a tool. It wasn't a scorecard to see who won at life. It was a way to take care of the people around him. His kindness wasn't just about big checks and Hollywood contracts. It was in the small, everyday moments that really showed who he was. There's a famous story about him riding the subway in New York City. He wasn't in a private limousine. He was just sitting on a plastic bench, holding onto a railing, surrounded by commuters. The train was crowded and noisy. At one point, he noticed a woman standing near him. She was struggling with heavy bags, looking tired. Without a second thought, he stood up and offered her his seat. It was a simple act, something people used to do all the time, but rarely do now. He didn't look around to see if anyone was watching. He didn't pull his cap down to hide his face. He just saw someone who needed help, and he helped. People often talk about how he treats the crew on his movie sets. In the world of film, there is a strict hierarchy. The stars are at the top, and the people who carry the equipment or serve the food are at the bottom. Many actors ignore the crew, treating them like invisible furniture. He was different. He knew the names of the people who drove the trucks. He ate lunch with them in the same tent, sitting on folding chairs and eating the same food. He made sure that when the workday ended, everyone on the crew got a gift, not just a generic thank you card, but something meaningful. He once bought Harley-Davidson motorcycles for the stunt team on The Matrix because he knew they risked their lives for him every day. He wanted them to know they were valued. He became known as a people person in the truest sense of the word. He loved to sit and talk to strangers. If he met a fan on the street who wanted to take a picture, he wouldn't just smile and rush away. He would stop. He would ask them how their day was. He would listen. He seemed to understand that a moment of kindness could change a person's whole day. He had felt so much pain in his own life that he didn't want anyone else to feel unnecessary pain if he could prevent it. There was a gentleness to him now. He moved through the world with a quiet grace. He didn't brag about his good deeds. He didn't post about them on the internet. For years, no one knew about the millions he gave at children's hospitals or cancer research. He did it because he felt it was the right thing to do. He was building a legacy, but it wasn't a legacy made of gold statues or magazine covers. It was a legacy made of moments. A sandwich given to a homeless person. A kind word to a crying fan. A paycheck shared with a coworker. He found a strange sort of peace in this. The sorrow of losing his daughter and his partner would never truly go away. It was a part of him, like a scar that aches when it rains. But he learned that he could carry that scar and still smile. He learned that being a legend didn't mean being the strongest or the richest. It meant being the most human. It meant having an open heart, even after it had been broken. He was no longer the young, hungry actor chasing a dream. He was a man who had seen the dark side of life and decided to light a candle rather than curse the darkness. He lived simply, so others could simply live. The world saw a movie star, but the people who met him saw something much rarer. They saw a good man, a man who had every reason to be bitter and angry, but chose to be kind instead. And in that choice, he became a hero in real life, not just on the screen. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was learning how to live again, one small act of kindness at a time. Life has a funny way of coming full circle. Years ago, he was a young man with a quick smile, running through action movies without a care in the world. Then came the darkness, the years of silence and grief that threatened to pull him under. But now, standing in the later chapter of his life, he found himself facing a camera once again, ready to play a role that felt strangely familiar. The script was for a movie called John Wick. On the surface, It was just another action movie about a retired hitman who gets pulled back into the violent world he left behind. But for him, and for the audience who watched closely, it was much more than that. The character of John Wick is a man who has lost everything. He has lost his wife, the only light in his life, and he is left with nothing but his grief and a dog. When the story begins, he is a broken man living in a big empty house, drowning in sorrow. When he stepped into this character, he didn't have to pretend. He knew exactly what it felt like to have the world go gray. He knew the ache of missing someone so much it hurts to breathe. He used that pain. He didn't just act the part. He poured his own soul into the character. The audience would feel it. When he looked into the distance with sad eyes, they weren't just seeing an actor playing a role. They were seeing a man who had walked through the fire and survived. Making these movies required a level of physical commitment that would exhaust a man half his age. He was older now, his face lined with the miles he had traveled, but he refused to use stunt doubles for the major fights. He spent months training in judo, jiu-jitsu, and tactical shooting. He wanted the action to be real. He wanted the audience to feel the impact of every punch and kick. There's a famous video from the set where he runs face first into a glass wall. It looks painful, but instead of getting angry or calling for a doctor immediately, he just cursed, wiped the blood away, and asked to do it again. The crew watched him with a mixture of awe and concern. He wasn't doing it for the money. He was doing it because he respects the work. He respects the audience. And maybe, in a way, fighting through the pain was his way of proving to himself that he was still here, still standing, still alive. Something strange and wonderful happened while he was playing this grieving action hero. The world fell in love with him all over again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just about his looks or his cool style. It was about who he was as a human being. The internet, usually a place of criticism and jokes, started to celebrate him. People dug up old stories of his kindness. They posted pictures of him sitting on a park bench, eating a sandwich alone, looking content with his own company. They called him the internet's boyfriend and a national treasure. But unlike many celebrities who get a big head from such attention, he just chuckled and carried on. He didn't let the praise change him. He didn't start acting like he was better than anyone else. He began to open up in interviews, just a little bit. He talked about philosophy, about how we are all here to help each other, and how grief and love are forever tied together. He spoke with a wisdom that can only come from suffering. He didn't sound like a movie star reading lines. He sounded like a regular guy who had learned some hard lessons. Younger actors looked up to him, not just because he was famous, but because he was real. In an industry full of fake people and fake smiles, he was a genuine article. He was a legend not because of his box office numbers, but because of his character. And then life gave him a gift he thought he might never have again. He found love. It wasn't the frantic love of teenagers or the Hollywood love of fame seekers. It was a quiet, mature love. He met an artist, a woman who understood his need for privacy and his quiet nature. They didn't shout about their relationship from the rooftops. They didn't pose for endless magazine covers. They just lived. They were seen walking hand in hand, going to art galleries, or just grabbing a coffee. Seeing him hold her hand, seeing a genuine smile reach his eyes again, made people who had followed his story feel happy for him. It was a reminder that no matter how dark the night gets, the sun does eventually rise. He proved that you can carry your scars and still find happiness. You can remember the people you lost and still make room for new people in your heart. He has reached a stage in his life where he is comfortable in his own skin. He doesn't try to be young. He doesn't try to hide his gray hair. He embraces getting older as a privilege denied to many. He rides his motorcycles, plays in his rock band, and makes movies that he enjoys. He still lives simply, still takes the subway, still treats the person serving him coffee with the same respect he treats a movie producer. He has no entourage, no bodyguards pushing people away. He moves through the world like a regular person, just one who happens to be known by millions. When people look back at his life, they see a journey of incredible resilience. They see a boy who moved from place to place, a young man who lost his best friend, a father who lost his child, a partner who lost his love. They see a man who had every reason to give up, to become bitter, or to disappear. Instead, he chose kindness. He chose to keep working, to keep creating, and to keep loving. He turned his pain into art and his loneliness into empathy. The legend of Keanu Reeves isn't about a guy who can dodge bullets or stop punches. It isn't about the money he made or the fame he achieved. The true legend is about a human being who refused to let the world harden his heart. He showed us that you can be in pain and still be kind. You can be successful and still be humble. You can lose everything and still find a way to build a new life. He stands today as a symbol of hope and endurance. He is the proof that even on the darkest days, if you just keep walking, eventually you will find the light again. And that is a story worth telling.